Part 2. Now this is really the most important for our young theologians and pastors in the making. The most important step in dealing with a philosophic or theological issue is that you define your terms before you defend them. Now that sounds so simple, but yet I'll have people say, free will, I believe in free will, I'm going to defend. I said, could you define the word free and the word will, and then put the two together to explain to me what you mean? Free from what? Free to what? Freedom in what does it consist? And what is the will? You have one? I thought that was a figure of speech. I mean, I never, the only will I have is in my bank deposit box. If I die, my wife gets everything. We both die, it goes to the kids, and if all four of it goes, the church gets everything. So, where is this will? That's a figure of speech. You don't have a mind, you think. You don't have a will somewhere sitting over here in a box. But you see, people make physical what is metaphorical. Well, you have a will, so we can discuss whether it is free or in bondage. You don't have one. You make choices, you think, you feel, you remember, you anticipate, you experience, and by figures of speech we can talk about it, but you don't have a mind. You think. Cogito ergo sum. You are a thinking person. So sometimes philosophers and theologians begin to talk as if you actually had three things in you in a cardboard box. Well, you see, at the fall of man into sin, his emotions were corrupted by sin, so he enjoys it. But his will wasn't. Because that's in a separate box, you see. And even though sin entered man, his mind was not affected. Only his, and see, it all comes out of making metaphysical what was metaphorical, of what is getting to what is called faculty psychology. But people will defend something, and when you ask them to define it, they can't. That's 99.9%. Now, when you do come up, I'll say take free will again, and someone says, what is free will? It is the power of contrary choice. It means you have the ability to do the opposite of what you in fact did. My first question, now that is found in 2 Aristotle 5:3. Could you show that to me in the Bible? Well, no, this is not a biblical issue. Defining a Christian view of man? Well, that's fine for Aristotle. But do you really want that definition, the power of contrary choice? Oh, absolutely. Then God can lie. God can sin. God can break His word. God can be unfaithful. Because it's unthinkable. See, I'm using the rationalist approach. It's unthinkable that God doesn't have a free will. Well, of course, if the greatest being, of which none other can be conceived of as greater, of course God is free. Well, does He have the ability to lie? See, He told the truth here, but if He's free, He can do the opposite. So Stephen Davis said, God can lie. God can sin. Question, what about the people in heaven? Are they free? Can they sin in heaven and start it all over again? Well, you would have to say that. Yes, they are. What about in the eternal state? You know, the wicked are in hell, the righteous are on the new earth. Can't someone sin and start the whole claptrap all over again and Christ have to come back? Well, it says we shall be made like him. God cannot sin. He cannot be tempted with evil. He cannot tempt anyone to do evil. It is impossible that God can lie. So someone tells you God can lie, God can sin, because God is free, and according to my definition from 2nd Aristotle 5:13, free will means the ability to do the opposite of what you've done, the power of God. You see, immediately there goes heaven, there goes the eternal state, and there goes God. No. What you find is this: people are idiots. Amen. They will defend terms having never defined them. And the first task of a theologian, a biblical theologian, is, excuse me, you need to define your terms. Before you get up and lead a charge and wave a flag and rally around the flag, boys. Before you do that, you need to define things. Such words as infant, child, and adult. Now, we already saw that when someone asks about infant salvation, they're scratching the top of an iceberg. What does that mean? With an iceberg, is the majority of it out of the water or under the water? See, when you say, what about infant salvation? Well, you're actually asking a much bigger question. Does the word infant describe fertilized eggs in a petri dish with the turkey baster? Well, absolutely. It's a human being. Once the sperm hits the egg, it doesn't matter if it's in a dish or where it is, a human life has begun. So, if you're discussing abortion, one of the first issues is quite simple. You're having fertility problems. They take 5 eggs from you. They take your husband's donation. They mix the 2 in a dish. All 5 get fertilized, and they flush 4 down the sink, and they implant 1. What did they just flush down the sink? 4 human beings. That means there's an ethical issue here. But what about that fertilized egg? If we say that human life begins at fertilization, and we're concerned about that, then what about the salvation of that egg? See, I'm going to expand your brain a little bit this morning. There are those theologians who say absolutely, the moment the egg divides, it is a potential human being and will either go to heaven or hell. Does it include the fetus developing in the womb? You know, see this big hulk next to you at one point was the size of your thumb. It's like my mother told me. I told her, considering moving to California many years ago, Walter Martin had asked me to come and to be the Bible answer man and to be the associate director of CRI. And I was considering it. She said, well, you actually began in California. I didn't know that. She said, well, during World War II, your dad had a couple of days at the San Diego Naval Base, and I took the bus from the East Coast, and we spent 3 days in the motel, and, well, you popped out the next year. So you began in San Diego. And I said, the salmon is returning to the spawning ground. So that's why I'm so comfortable here. I'm returning. Well, is there a line at which you say the fetus doesn't have a soul? Do you weigh the fetus? Or do we say the fetus, so when you have certain birth controls that allow the egg to be fertilized, but then keep it from being implanted on the uterine wall, that's abortion. You have just killed a human being. Well, then what about the salvation of that little grub worm? Little grubby. Are we asking if children lost through miscarriages? My mother-in-law, how many miscarriages did my mom have? 3 miscarriages. Very hard to go through a miscarriage. Matter of fact, some sharp people have figured out that in the history of humanity there have been more miscarriages than births. At some point, no birth control, the majority of mankind, the majority of human history. Every month there's an egg traveling down the tube. The husband's ready, willing, and able. So why aren't we with 25 billion people? Because most fertilized eggs don't make it to fully developed form. Now we know more about it, but there's an awful lot of miscarriages that go on that nobody knows. Dr. Ed, aren't there a lot of miscarriages that happen a woman doesn't even know she miscarried?
I'm not an obstetrician, but I agree with you.
Yeah, well, you're one of those omniscient medical doctors. Doesn't matter what. They bring you into court trials to comment on everything. What about abortions? You know that this country has aborted how many millions of babies? 50 million babies. Well, where do they go? What about stillbirths? What about partial birth abortion? Aren't those all under this rubric? I think so. Do they make it to heaven without repentance toward God and faith in Jesus Christ? If so, on what grounds? And could the heathen claim the same grounds? Once born, how long is someone classified as an infant? At what point do they move to being a child? You go from infant to child. You say, well, I believe in infant salvation. So the moment your kid, what, 3, 2, 1? What birthday is it that they lose their salvation? And from that point on, the flames are licking at the feet. Well, you got to tell me that. Anybody here know when you stop being a baby?
Maturity level.
Maturity level? I asked my pastor and his wife when I was a Ute, and he said very simple, as his wife spoke up. When you say no, let's say your baby wants to go chew the wires. Every child I know loves electrical wires. They go right for the outlets, right for the wires, and even if you put those caps in there, they're there whittling them off. They all got to put something in that electric outlet. Your baby picks up a wire with the one tooth, and you say, no. Now, you've been saying no, and they were oblivious. You say no. Look at you. Bite down. You go over and, no. 2 seconds later, no. As soon as your baby knows the meaning of no. So when they went up, I used to have to, in Pennsylvania, I heated my home for 10 years with a wood stove, a right-way wood stove. In the worst of winter, coal and wood. I was a lumberjack. I mean, I was cutting wood on my property. It was horrible. Filthy, dirty bugs, smoke. But you would say to the children, "So heiß." Do you remember it all, Ruth Ann? I told you in German. "So heiß, mucho caliente." I tried different languages to get through to these kids. But you know your kid will do this at least how often? Once they're going to touch the oven.
Oh, yeah.
Or get close.
That's child abuse.
Child abuse. It's like my kids are hanging upside down from the swing set and Annie looks out. She says, "Stop them." And I said, no. Every kid's going to be hanging upside down until they fall and hit their head. Then they learn. Let them fall. That's part of life. Now they may call that child abuse today. Does someone at some point move from being an infant to a child? What signals this change? A specific age? If so, what age? Is it arbitrary?
Is bar mitzvah is biblical based at 13? Does that have any relevance?
We'll find out. You don't think I missed that question, did you? I've been studying this issue 30 years. Okay. Oh, well, the question, what about bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah? Because the girls now are involved. Does that show? Well, I hope not. Until you're 12, you're covered by salvation? No Jew ever taught that.
Gangbang.
Gangbangers at 11. Okay, sounds like the news at 11. Does the assured salvation of an infant differ from that of a child? You got to answer that. Is there some point at which if a child died, he would end up in hell? At what point? What is this exact point? Is it a matter of age? Now we come to a cliche in evangelical circles. Age of accountability. How many have ever heard the phrase, age of accountability? Yes. I remember watching the old PTL. And Tammy was running the show. And the old preacher from the Assembly of God's radio program, Glad Tidings, Pastor Ward, was there. And she got, you know how Tammy goes. Some of you remember Tammy? And she said, well, you know, it doesn't matter because they're covered until the age of accountability. And she paused. But you know, she said, I don't think I ever found that in the Bible. Where is the age of accountability in the Bible? And the preacher said, well, I don't know, but it's got to be there. Because I have heard it all my life. And he says, well, I'm glad it's in there somewhere. So, age of accountability. Now you have to think about this. Hear what I mean. If you can have a cliche. Someone says, well, they're covered till the age of accountability. Satisfied. Wait a second, you didn't define that. Does this mean that before the age of accountability, God holds infants and children accountable for their sins? See, the word accountable. There's a time that kids are accountable to God for what they do and a time when they're not accountable? Is that the issue?
I was raised Roman Catholic, and I have an idea where this term may have originated from, because I was taught that but the people who gave us limbo and purgatory,
Yes.
the day you turn 7 is the date that you are accountable.
The day you turn 7 is the day you're, according to the Catholic upbringing that you had. Maybe because at the Catholic Church at the bingo, it was 7 come 11. So the 7 is what meant it. That's the only place they could possibly get that. The age of account, what does it mean? You're not accountable up to that point? Then should you spank a child, a baby? A child that goes up and hits. I was visiting in one person's home, and the kid and the terrible twos went around hitting all of the adults. Ah! And I looked at the parents who were amused. And he got a ruler. And he came over to hit me, and I said, no! If the baby has an age of accountability, then can you spank a child when they're not accountable for whatever they do? If you don't discipline your children, we have a term in Latin I taught my children. Would you remember? Braticus maximus. Mean the great brat. And you find them. You find them. And they grow up and you meet them at work. Does the Old Testament teach the doctrine of, quote, age of accountability? I haven't found it. Is the age of accountability taught in the Midrash? That is the oldest commentary on the Bible written by the Jews. Is it taught in the Mishnah, which is the commentary on the Midrash by the rabbis? Is it taught in the Talmuds, which is the commentary on the Mishnah, which is a commentary on the Midrash, which is a commentary on the Torah? No. Is it taught in the literature between Malachi and Matthew? Now, these are just simple questions. Someone says, I don't know and I don't care. No, hold on here. If Christianity is the flower of which Judaism is the bud, if something has no Jewish roots, And it doesn't come from the Old Testament. You better be careful. Matter of fact, all fundamental Bible-believing doctrines are thoroughly Jewish. We believe that Jesus was HaMashiach, the Messiah. Mistranslated Christ, transliteration Christus, the Messiah. Well, that was a brand new idea to the Jews, wasn't it? The concept of a Messiah. No. That the Messiah was to be born where? Bethlehem. Well, you got to understand, if something has no Jewish pedigree, I get nervous about it. I get nervous about it. Does the New Testament teach the age of accountability doctrine? See, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, no. Now, some people argue from silence. Well, if the New Testament doesn't condemn it, I can believe it. Now, that was the Catholic argument during the Reformation. Show me in the Bible where it says we cannot swing incense balls. Show me where it says we can't pray to Mary. Show me where it says you can't worship the saints and venerate them. Show me. He said, nah. You're saying because the Bible doesn't discuss certain issues which were not relevant because they weren't being done in their day, it means you can do it. If it's not forbidden, you can do it. Then you can have striptease for Jesus. Where's the Bible condemn that? No, you can't have that. Is it taught in the literature of the early church? Remember this Reformed Baptist pastor. We don't believe in choirs, Dr. Morey. Here you have a choir. I said, yes. Well, Walt Chantry's told us you can't have choirs. I said, and buses. Oh, no, we don't believe in church buses. There's nothing in the Bible about church buses. Or youth pastors, no, there's nothing in the Bible. You can't have it if the Bible doesn't teach it. And furthermore, neither did the early church teach it. I said, oh, really? You've read the Apostolic Fathers? Well, Chantry has, and he said, no, where did the early church ever have choirs? I said, I happen to have the Apostolic Fathers in Greek, Latin, and Syriac over here. Let me show you something. Directions for the choir director. What? Let me see that. They were Jews. What does that mean? Did they have choirs in the Old Testament? Did they have musical instruments of the Church of Christ? We don't believe musical instruments. Oh, really? Really? The Jews with the tambourines somehow disappeared? The early Christians were what? Jews. And guess what they did? Clap your hands, all ye people, rattle and trumpets, and of course they did it all. People are ignorant of the early church. But I like to look at the apostolic church, people who sat at the feet of the apostles. Is the idea of an age of accountability valid if it was never taught in the Bible or in historic Judaism or Christianity? If we can't find it in Jewish soil, we can't find it in Christian soil, what is the logical question you must ask? Where did it come from? If it didn't come from the Jews, it didn't come from the Christians. If it first arose during the Renaissance, the Renaissance was the age of what? Reason. We call the age of enlightenment, in which man was now free from the constraints of the Bible. Man was now God. You begin with man. I can do it. I can think it through. My reason is sufficient. My feelings, my experience. The Renaissance was the pride and conceit of man who shook his fists at God and said, I no longer need you. In science, we can explain all miracles. Miracles are no longer needed. God is no longer needed. Matter of fact, one philosopher during the French Revolution developing the humanism and talking with Napoleon explained his philosophy, and Napoleon responded, but you never referred to God in your philosophy. Oh, we have no further need of God. Well, the Renaissance was the product of humanistic thought. And did the age of accountability doctrine first appear among the Romantics? Now, what was Romanticism that came out of the Renaissance? Any history buffs here? Too bad my son isn't here. Well, more than that, Romanticism in the coming out of the French Revolution with Jean-Jacques Rousseau and others talked about the nobility of the savage, the primitive, that which is natural is right, of the innocency of non-Christian people, of babies, of everything. And the only evil in the world is Christianity. Sex, by the Romantics, was viewed as what? Innocent and loads of fun. So in the Romantic period, you married someone, for the first time in human history, you didn't marry someone because you loved them. Your marriage was prearranged. You loved someone because you're married to them. Now, I know for you that's a shock, but we now live post-Romantic period. You married someone who turned you on romantically. And in order to get him in the sack, you had to walk down the aisle, if they had any morals. Otherwise, like today, you just climb in the sack. Romanticism said everything is innocent. There is no original sin. Man is not a sinner by nature. A Romantic view of man says man is what at the bottom? Good and kind. See, the Romanticism is what's produced all these divorces. Let's say a guy, some enchanted evening, he meets a stranger from across the room. His hormones go crazy. They meet, her hormones go crazy. They get married on the basis of hormones. 3 years later, some enchanted evening, a woman at work, his hormones go crazy. He ditches the first, moves to the second. 5 years later, some enchanted evening. If you marry on the basis of hormones, then you will go from failed marriage to failed. Because if all you have is sex as the glue to hold your marriage together, same old, same old. That's why our culture's in such a bad shape. You know, I've told my kids I wish I could prearrange their marriages. Prearranged marriages rarely have divorces. No. I'm afraid that Romanticism cannot be undone. It's just that after some enchanted evening, when you meet them across the church assembly hall, there will be further discussions before you hit the sack or walk the aisle. There has to be true love. So it's the love that God gives you. You had a question or comment that I already
mentioned that John Locke in English, British.
Yes, Locke, the father of empiricism. Yes, John Locke. Yeah, well, the Romantics actually were against empiricism, and David Hume and John Locke, who were nasty. Because you see, Romanticism has an idealistic view of man. Man is good. Everything's great. Nobody has evil intentions. They didn't really mean to do evil. It's the Romantics who changed prisons where criminals were punished into correctional institutes where good people are rehabilitated.
One of his favorite expressions, and I remember to this very day, to save people from the shafts of malice, which we get the purple shaft from.
Oh, okay. You see, the philosophers have tried to say the problem is your environment. If you have a better education and a better self-image, you won't kill people. So in these correctional institutes, they're even now giving plastic surgery. Thousands and thousands of dollars. You take an ugly rapist, turn him into a good-looking, handsome rapist, and say, well, now that he looks better, he won't rape. No, he rapes a lot easier. But you see, the romantics believe you shouldn't punish anyone. I mean, the jail should have, cable and porn and gyms, and they should bulk up. And that one guy in Texas, he was on Hannity's show, who puts prisoners in tents, no cable TV, no air conditioning. They're given like 2,500 calories a day, no weight machines, no tennis courts, they are punished. They're in chain gangs. The women are on chain gangs. The youths are out clearing the brush and fighting gators. And people are always suing him. But see, romanticism is what ruins everything. And it's romanticism in the church that is the bane of it. Give me an example of a Christian who has a romantic view of salvation. Well, once you get saved, what? Everything is solved, every problem. You'll be happy, and everything will be great. Once I got saved, all hell broke out. There are Christian romantic movies where the birds chirp at the end, and they lived happily ever after. That's a romantic. Does that happen?
Never.
There are romantics about church experience, and they go from church to church. Why? Well, the last church, I was hurt, so I moved to the next one. I'm looking for that church. Well, I'll never be hurt. And will you ever find a perfect church?
If you do, don't join it.
If you do, don't join it, yes. But people who are looking romantically for a perfect woman will never get married. You have these guys, 35 years old, not married, looking for the perfect woman. Of course, they haven't stood in front of a mirror for very long. They're not a perfect man. They're not even a number 10. But you have guys who are a 5 on the scale of looks who expect a number 10. Bo Derek is going to come rushing in. Real problems, people. It's romanticism. And people get romantic about babies and infants and things. Now, it appeared with the noble savage, the innocence of nature myth, a denial of original sin, a denial of evil in the heart, saying that everything's environment. Now, what if God doesn't view fetuses, infants, and children as sinners, or does he view them as sinners? Can they sin while they're in the womb? Who can answer that for me?
Yes.
Who? What? Their children are innocent.
Jacob, I love.
Jacob was wrestling with Esau already in the womb, fighting already, sibling rivalry. Already gone. Can you rejoice in the womb? John the Baptist was kicking for joy because he could hear his mom talking about the Messiah. Your kids can hear through the wall. Absolute. Talk to them. I used to say, hello down there. It's Daddy. Repent. Believe.
You got a question, Dr. Bob?
Dr. Bob, if John the Baptist could praise the Lord in the womb, could he have been saved at that point?
Oh, that's a good question. We will look at that text a little closer. What it says is that he was kicking, and by poetic license, it's in the middle of a poem.
Okay.
So every pregnant woman has experienced her baby kicking. And she said, oh, he's moving. Oh, it's like he's rejoicing. Well, that's poetic license. No one in the New Testament, you see, that. It's just poetry. Poetry, my dear. Here, if God views them as sinners, does the Bible ever refer to fetus? Yes. Human beings need salvation. So do fertilized eggs. Infants, babies. See, you wouldn't have the doctrine of infant salvation unless you already assumed they need salvation. They're sinners. When do sinners begin? When the egg divides. When the egg divides. I always like it when people have their first baby. Sun sets and rises, an innocent child, never do anything wrong. That's because they're in a bassinet and they can't move yet. You put them on the counter, they're locked up in that thing. Then they can't move, then of course they're innocent. They can't get involved in anything. Well, if we decide to accept the romantic notion of an age of accountability, at what age do children lose their assured salvation? Is this age the same for all children across the board? Or are there other factors that determine this point? If the age is relative to each individual child, so that every child will have a different age of accountability, if you want to accept accountability, then is the age of accountability an arbitrary and meaningless phrase because it has nothing to do with an age? If you agree there isn't any age at which ipso facto, magically, a kid changes over, but it's actually something else, then why are we talking about age of accountability? Could it be the Renaissance period, the age of 7 in the Catholic Church? Instead of an arbitrary age, does the physical development of a child determine when he loses his assured salvation? He's saved up to this point. Is that what you're saying? Do some children develop faster than others? How many had more than one child? Moms, okay. Did each child develop differently at their own speed? Yeah, talk with the little girl, she could be a magpie. Talk to the boy, doesn't say anything except with the truck. I've had parents all upset, something brain damage. I said, no, he's just a boy. He'll learn car sounds before he will elocution. The girl's a magpie. Is the mental development of a child more important than the physical? What if a child physically is a dwarf, a midget, or something, an arm doesn't, but they're mentally developed? Is the physical development really the determining point of when your child is accountable? No, it's the mental ability. Isn't it mental ability? Are we really talking about mental accountability? Is the mental development something that can be gauged, or is it a sliding scale relative to each individual child? Some kids are smarter than others, even in the same family. Well, it's mental. Can we agree that it's really mental development what we're talking about? When a child understands right from wrong, for example, what the word no means? If this is true, should we drop the phrase age of accountability and talk about mental development? Mental development. If mental development is the key event that causes someone to lose their assured salvation, how much mental development? How high does your IQ have to be? How smart do you have to be? At what point do you say, this kid's smart enough to be damned? This one's too dumb. His salvation is assured for another year. Look at him. Still sucking on his toes. How do you measure a child's mental ability? Do you mean simply the IQ? Are you fixating on him sucking his toes or what? Some babies do.
I know. She did.
Yeah. If mental ability is the determining factor of when your kids lose their assured salvation, what if someone developed a psychological test that could be given to a child that you would know right there and then whether your kid was still saved or it was now lost? Could such a test be actually developed? And would people use the test to see if their child is still saved? What test results determine the cutoff point? I mean, is it 70 out of a score of 100? Do you let them slide by with D-? If they get an F, the higher they go, the more likely they get that. What are you going to say? You see, this is getting complicated, you see. What about a 30-year-old retarded man who never mentally developed? Al Gore. Well, yes. While he is an adult in his body, he is mentally only a child. Is he still assured of salvation if he dies at 30 years of age? I know people who believe that. Even if the retarded person gets another retarded person pregnant, they say, oh, he's not accountable. There's no sin with if you have mental deficiency, there's no sin. Whatever you do, yes?
The 30-year-old person, isn't that through God's grace that he could be saved? It's a gift from God.
All right, the question, if God wanted to save him and he was mentally like a 2-year-old, if a 2-year-old can get saved, so could he. But that's by accepting Christ, by being saved, traditional means of understanding the gospel and believing. Children can be saved. I believe in child evangelism. I believe in Sunday school. And I believe in teaching your children from the womb. I used to rock my children, sing to them about Jesus. But I would never give them a test to try to tell me when they were ready or not ready. If I had a child who was 30s, 40s, and 50s, and mentally that of an infant, you have those who are even worse. They're infants. They're vegetables. They just lie there. They don't even play with toys. I'm just asking questions. If salvation covers someone from conception to some point in mental development, what if an adult has an accident and regresses back down the scale of mental development to be the level of an infant or brain-damaged child? Whatever goes up can come down. So this person was an adult, rejected Christ, but they had an accident in their car. Now they're reduced to the mental age of 1. Does that mean all of a sudden they can be saved just because they're 1 mentally? Yes.
I noticed the term assured salvation has kept recurring here. Is that still up for grabs as to whether or not it's valid?
No, we had not. That's just, it's part of the equation. I picked it up from various writers. I have all the books on this. Many of them say the assured salvation of infants. Now, they don't even ask the questions that John MacArthur has a recent book. He doesn't go and deal with any of these issues. It was very disappointing. I have yet to find a book where anybody deals with these issues or answers these questions. But they refer to it as assured salvation. But it's even going to get more complicated. What material difference is there between someone who is brain damaged at birth and someone who gets brain damaged later on in an accident? See, if being brain damaged means assured salvation, well, then you get in without believing in Christ or hearing the gospel. Now, how many of you agree? Well, some people may be upset with me. These 41 questions, did I expand your understanding of the issue? All right. Do you see things are not as easy as they seem on the surface? Someone who writes a book on this issue and never wrestled with any of these issues, should they be writing a book on this? No, they shouldn't. And I have books. I even got books from the 19th century on this. I read Spurgeon on this. I read Charles Hodge, who said, oh, speaking of infant baptism, oh, let the infants be baptized, that their names will be enrolled on the Lamb's book of life, though later they may erase their names. So when you baptize a baby, then there's a new name written down in glory, and it's his or her, though they may erase it later. Is that what we believe? Well, there's going to be further questions. The next section will talk about is there a distinction between your children and the children of unbelievers? What if your children are covenant children? Does God treat them differently than heathen children? What if your child is baptized or your child is not baptized? Does that make a difference? You see, these are all important questions. All I wanted to do was not get into verses. I just wanted to ask questions to expand your IQ. I want to pump you up. Now, what I do in the Crusaders Club, as you will verify, I ask all these kinds of questions to make people think. I'm actually teaching you to fish, not just give you fish. Which is easier? Give somebody fish. I want to teach you how to do theology. Amen. Theology is something you do. This is how you do it. I don't care what the issue is. Asking the right questions will determine where you end up. Father, thank you for our time together. We pray that you give us a spirit of thankfulness to all of your mercies, which are new every morning. In Christ's name, amen.